All right. Hey, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining another episode of Celeste, the Therapist Podcast. My name is Celeste. I'm a therapist from the best city in the world, Boston. Perry's laughing. I don't know if he agrees, but we'll figure out. But one of the things that I do is like, I love to teach people who are feeling stuck how to get unstuck and go from just walking around stuck to walking in purpose. And I do that well when I have people like Perry on to share their story. I think that helps people where they realize they're not alone. So, Perry, can you introduce yourself to my audience?
Yeah, so first of all, thanks for having me on. I'm excited to be here. My name is Perry Hull. I'm the Outreach Project Manager at the Hope Initiative of Bunker Hill. Basically, what we do is we support the college's Black and Latino men, making sure that they are picking the right courses, uh, planning for their careers, and just feeling comfortable in a space that wasn't designed to support them initially.
Nice. Now, Perry, you kind of smiled when I said the best city in the world. I'm assuming
Yeah.
you're not from Boston.
I'm not from Boston. I kind of grew up, split my time between Syracuse, New York, and Memphis, Tennessee. And then I
Oh.
came to Boston around 6, 7 years ago. And I gotta say, it's grown on me. I still can't stand Pats fans, but I've come to enjoy the city. It wasn't what I expected. It was a lot more diverse than I thought it was going to be. I kind of pictured the city of the Boston Irish, but I found out
Uh-huh.
that it was not this what the stereotypes depicted. And yeah, it's become a place that I love to be. But yeah,
Nice.
I'll never root for the Pats. So that's my only sticking
And I'll never root for the Giants.
point.
It's so interesting because when I tell people where I'm from, they say, "Oh, black people live in Boston." I'm like, "Yeah," but now that you're here, you see how it is. They have pockets of segregation, I think,
Yeah.
which is a socioeconomic thing.
Hmm.
But you started in Syracuse, New York. What was
Hmm.
your upbringing like growing up in New York?
Yeah. So I mean, I guess the first thing I would want to say is, and this kind of frames a lot of my background. I came from a family with a lot of history and education, so a lot of educational capital
Uh,
and privilege, right? So my grandfather, graduated from Ohio State University in the 50s. He has a PhD in entomology, and so he taught at Fisk
in
University
the
in Nashville.
50s?
Yeah, and so it's actually amazing because
Wow.
he's deceased now, but on his, as he was kind of passing away, he told my father that, my parents are both from Tennessee. My mom is from Memphis and my dad is from Nashville. And he told my father that the state of Tennessee paid him to study somewhere else because they didn't want to give a black man a PhD. So that's how he ended up going out to Ohio State to study there.
Wow.
So my grandfather on my father's side has his PhD, and my grandmother, his wife, was a school teacher. Both my
Wow.
parents had graduate degrees. My father is an engineer, now retired. My
Oh, wow.
mother was a professor of anthropology and economics, right? So I came from a background where education was really central to a lot of what we did, right? And
Yeah.
so, I was living in upstate New York. We were, in a predominantly white suburb, and my parents were really, my mother in particular was very intentional of making sure that I, was surrounded by other black folks. So I had a lot of black
Nice.
friends in our white space. We had, our little crew and our one token white friend. But my first 2 years as a student, very normal. I was a nerdy kid. I loved to play sports, but I, loved to read. We would be in the car listening to NPR, and I would be asking questions. And my mom was
Wow.
really the kind of person where she wanted me to think for myself, right? So we would have arguments and conversations, and if I said
Right.
something that she didn't agree with, she'd be like, prove it, right? Look it up and show me the facts, right? So she kind of trained me to be a researcher.
Wow.
Even as a little kid. So I was one of those precocious, annoying little kids who was always asking me why. And she encouraged that, right? Because that kind of
Yeah.
curiosity kind of leads to that growth that you want to have. And so when I was 10, my parents got divorced, and my mom moved to Memphis, and I moved with her. And so this is kind of when I would say my interest in education began. And I didn't know at the time, right? Because when I went to Memphis, I was in a whole different school environment, right? I went from a predominantly white suburb where there was a lot of resources. You had like band and sports and all these different materials that you could engage with as a student to be feel supported, to
Yeah.
a school in Memphis where we were essentially being warehoused, right? It was an all black school. The school is no longer functional. And in fact, the entire district, Memphis City Schools, is defunct now. But it was a school where you had two types of teachers, right? You had these Teach for America teachers who came in, always, young white women who wanted to, save the world. And we
Mhm.
would basically just destroy them within a couple of weeks. And, literally, they would come in after the first few weeks and put their head down and we would just do whatever we want to do for the whole class session and just
Yeah.
learn nothing. And the other teachers were the teachers who had been there for the longest time, and they were all Black. And this was a public school system where corporal punishment was allowed, right? So if you got in trouble, you got what was called licks, right? So the teachers had a strap, like a leather strap, and you had to hold your hand out, and they'd give you 10 or 15 or 20 licks on your hand, right? So they would just smack you in the hand over and over again. And there would always be a kid who would pull their hand away at the last minute, and they would just get beat all over their body. And
What
again, this
year
is a
was
public
this?
school. This was 1999. Am I aging myself? Yeah, 1998, 1999. So yeah, they were still doing corporal punishment.
Yo, that's crazy.
Yeah. And so, it was, you have metal detectors, police officers on, on and very few books, no actual, sports that were really committed. And so, we really were just in this space to be held. We were being warehoused, and there were students who had been held back so much they were in middle school and driving to school, right? And so
Damn.
it was an environment where, as I got older, I kind of read and I learned. I came to realize that schools are how society tells you how you're valued and what's expected of you, right?
Yeah.
So if you go to a space where you are being physically punished, where you are under resourced, where you are looked at as a criminal, that's telling you what's expected of you, right? And this school, it was divided up into, every grade had 4 sections, right? And that was supposed to be tiered by your academic potential. So it would be like 7-1, 7-2, 7-3, 7-4, right? And I'd already come from a more well-resourced educational
Right.
system. I had that educational capital for my family. So I was not only in 7-1, but they put me up a grade. And even in the highest level class at the grade above where I was supposed to be, we were not learning anything, right? We were just
Yeah.
being treated as, bodies to be held. And so, I went through middle school there. And then eventually, I found myself getting into trouble and just not really enjoying the space that I was in. And so I went back to Syracuse with my father. And I found that I didn't enjoy education anymore because I was just really resentful because I now realized like what I had before was not what every student got. Right. And I
Yeah.
felt like, why do these students, this is a predominantly white school. Why are they getting all these resources? They have all these different clubs and programs. There are no cops. I'm not wearing a clear backpack. I'm not getting physically punished. And the other schools and students in Memphis are being treated like, criminals. Right. And so that's when I began to really pull away from education and not really participate as much. I was, getting into trouble. I really only went to school to play sports and do whatever, right? And so I was that kid who would really get good grades on the tests, but not do my homework. And as I got older, I kind of realized that it was because I just I thought education was kind of a joke, or at least I felt like it was so inequitably distributed that I was resentful of it. And so I got through high school, like at the bottom of my class. I managed to graduate.
Mhm.
And I was at that point trying to figure out what I was going to do next. And I considered going into the military. And this is like, post 9/11, George W. Bush is the president. The war in Iraq is going on. And so after thinking it through a little bit, I decided that probably was not the move I wanted to make.
Yeah, I
Um,
know.
and so, I decided to move back down south to live with my mom and just try to figure out how to get my head right. And I enrolled in community college. And so I actually ended up going across the river because Memphis is on the border of um, Arkansas and Tennessee
Mhm.
to a school on the other side in Arkansas. And to kind of give you a background on this school, it was in a town called Forest City, named after Nathan Bedford Forrest, who's one of the founders of the KKK. So it was a very segregated and racially charged community. But for all of its issues, it was a chance for me to re-engage with education, right? Because the college space gives you a lot more autonomy as a student than the high school space was, where I kind of
Yeah.
chafed against some of the pressures of the structure of high school and felt limited and kind of lashed out. In college, I was able to kind of regain my interest in education and kind of dictate my own path. And I had wonderful professors, and I was in this little honors program where they kind of definitely helped me re-engage with education. And so I was
Can I
able to,
pause you for
yeah,
for one
please,
second?
absolutely, yeah,
Because I'm thinking about the extreme of the system in New York and the system in Tennessee.
yeah,
Because there's people listening, and I think that a lot of times we get caught up in what's not our fault, and it felt so unfair, the inequities that you were seeing. What was the turning point for you to decide to even engage in the idea of enrolling in a community college? Because for some people, they allow like the environment that they were in to keep them in this place of it's not fair, but
hmm,
something changed that allowed you to even think about going into community college.
yeah. That's a great question. I mean, my junior senior year in high school, I saw my friends going down two different paths. Like a couple of my
Okay.
friends got arrested and they were incarcerated. They were out in the streets dealing. We were all doing things out in the streets we should have been doing, but that one got caught, selling drugs. The other one, there was an incident where somebody got very seriously hurt, and other friends of mine were going to college, and I kind of saw a fork in the road, right? I can either, uh,
Oh,
you know, go this direction or wind up in prison, right?
okay.
And so, the military was one of my ways to kind of escape either option, but that wasn't necessarily the path I wanted to take. And so I realized, let me try this education thing honestly. And
Nice.
it was also just kind of looking at my family background, knowing how education had been the background of my family's, especially on my father's side, their whole careers, their community. They were both heavily involved in HBCUs and their fraternities and sororities. My grandmother was an AKA. My
Wow.
grandfather was a Kappa Alpha Psi. So it was a big part of the community in Nashville, and it was one of those
Yeah.
things that I realized, there is a lot to it, and also, when my mother was teaching, I was sometimes, even as a kid, I was in those college classrooms and kind of seeing what it
Okay.
was like in terms of, students there are able to express themselves a little bit more. They're able to pick what courses they take. And so I said, let me give this a shot, right? I want to experience this for myself and see what I can make of it. Because even when I wasn't being a good student in high school, I was still reading a lot. I was still researching things. I was just
Oh,
not engaging in school the way that I should have been. I was just doing it on my own because I thought I was smarter than everybody else, right?
okay.
So yeah, and so community college was a chance for me to really rebuild myself as a student. And
Mhm.
so I was able to get my grades back on track and kind of figure out what I wanted to study. I really loved reading, so I was studying literature and particularly African American literature to kind of learn about my background in history. And so from there, I decided to go on to college. And so for that, I went back to New York. I went to one of the state schools in New York because that was one of the ones that was affordable for me. And then, from there, I had professors there who really saw potential in me, and one in particular um, who said, I could see you becoming a teacher. And I had never thought about it like that, but she had me apply to a program that was designed to increase the representation of underrepresented students in graduate school, right? And so it was an amazing experience because it was a summer program where they took, seven students from around the country. They gave us a stipend, and we just kind of went and learned about the process of becoming a graduate student and then maybe becoming an academic, right? And so from there, I applied to grad school. I got into what's my top choices, and then I enrolled in the PhD program at Brown, and from there, I really that was the time where I really got to really intellectually build myself. I was able to be surrounded by incredible scholars like Trisha Rose, the author Chinua Achebe. I had great advisors in my English program. And so, I had the privilege of basically having 5 years of being paid to study and teach.
That's
Um,
dope.
and so it was very much the whiplash, though, to go from East Arkansas Community College in a rural, very segregated town to now this Ivy League university where there are so many students who have come from fancy high schools and have always been on this path to this kind of elite institution. So it was definitely a culture shock to me in some ways, but it was an incredible experience for me to not only learn from incredible scholars, but to design and teach my own class, and just meet really great people. And so, as I'm working towards this PhD, you know, I did begin to reflect, like, if I'm going to move into this space of education, what community do I want to impact, right? Because,
Yeah.
the students who I was interacting with at Brown, for the most part, were incredibly privileged. They came from mostly wealthy backgrounds, not entirely, but the majority of them. And,
Mhm.
the goal from my department and for most programs at schools like this is to send their graduates to other elite institutions.
Mhm.
And so, I went to my advisor and I kind of said, I think I would like to work with community college students. I think, that's a space where it's open access. Anyone can enroll in these spaces.
Mhm.
And, I'm able to help students who are like me, who are kind of adrift and trying to figure out how to carve a path for themselves. And so he kind of laughed at that idea because that's not necessarily what they want their graduate students to do, because that doesn't increase the prestige of their department or their school. And he was incredibly supportive, of my studies in general, but it wasn't necessarily what they saw they had in mind for me. And so, I think the other challenge that I had was in that discipline of English. You're writing in a way where it is only accessible to other scholars, other PhD students, or other professors, right? So,
Right, right.
what is your audience and who you're reaching, right? And so, even as much as I loved literature in the application undergraduate, I realized um, I was much more interested in education itself, right? For all the reasons that I mentioned before about these disparate institutions and my upbringing. And so I said, even though I love this program, I think I might need to go a different direction. And so, I left the program before finishing I got my master's degree on the way to the PhD, but left the program before getting my PhD. And I went to go work at basically a K through 8 school in Central Falls, Rhode Island, which is a little bit north of Providence. And so I was working at a school that was, dominated by students whose first language was not English. And I was teaching them English language learner. I was teaching English language learners in the classroom, helping them adjust to English instruction in the classroom. And I said, okay, I went from, working with undergrads to working with like kindergarten through eighth. Let me find a middle ground. Let me think about that point of intervention where I can
Yeah.
make a really critical change. And
Yeah.
so I kind of thought about that moment that I had when I was in my senior year of high school, getting ready to go to college. And so I started looking at jobs in college access, right? So helping students who are finishing high school prepare to move on to college, right? And
Mhm.
so that's how I ended up in Boston from Providence. So I found a nonprofit in Boston that was working with first generation students from high school, DPS students mostly, and helping them prepare their application to go to college. And then once they were there, supporting them at those schools.
Mhm.
And so I worked there. I started out, going into basically every high school in Boston. We would have a table set up and we just say, hey,
That's
you
dope.
join our program. We can help you apply to college. We'll help you even when you're in college. And so that was, a great experience to have because not only did I get to learn about Boston by visiting its schools, but by talking to young people who were at that same critical fork in the road that I had.
Yeah.
Um, and so, it was a great experience, even if the nonprofit pay was not great for how much Boston costs. I met so many incredible students and was able to kind of make that intervention at moments that I felt
It
were
was
important. And I
critical.
still hear from them. Yeah, absolutely.
That's dope.
Um,
I
yeah.
have so, I'm just a little bit older than you because I was I the last my last 2 years of high school, I moved to Georgia and,
Mm,
the recruiters was coming in. I was at this critical it's so interesting you talk about this critical point. I never thought about it that deeply on how much, that age group kind of goes into what's next because everything's lined up for you, right? Elementary, middle school. After high school, there's technically nothing really lined up for you. The choice is
exactly.
yours. And,
Hmm.
I remember I joined the military. This is before 9/11. This was I graduated high school in 2000. So before 9/11, I joined the military, but it was National Guard, thank goodness. And,
Mm,
after the first year, I realized, the military wasn't for me, but I had to stick it out. I listen, I did no sports, nothing. And so I'm a 17-year-old kid. I graduated at 17 in the
mhm,
system. But then I enrolled in a community college and
mhm,
I just was like, all I knew was like they say go to college, you can make money. I didn't even know what I was doing.
mhm.
But what about the because after I want to go into what you're doing at Hope, What about the
Yeah.
financial piece, the financial barriers that Black and brown people face when it comes to college? Because it's great, I think, if you have a career path. And I lucked out. I honestly didn't know what I was doing. I just knew I was trying to figure out what's next. But what
Mhm.
about the burden that people face? What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's continues to get worse. I mean, my parents were able to pay for their college education with summer jobs and side gigs like that. And now that's impossible if you're talking about
Yeah.
a 4-year university. And that's one of the reasons why I was so interested in community colleges
Yeah,
because
it's more affordable.
um, it's more affordable. And I mean, if you're eligible for the Pell Grant, the majority of our students are able to use the Pell Grant to fully cover the cost of their courses, right? So not only are they going for free, but they're typically getting a refund that helps them cover books and
Mhm.
transportation and cost of living in an expensive city, right? So community colleges are open access not only in terms of admission, but if you
Yeah.
qualify for financial aid, which not all students do, but those who do, you're able to go essentially for free if you don't earn if your family doesn't earn a lot of money, right? So that was also very important to me because if all the graduates of elite institutions with educations cluster at other elite spaces, it's basically the rich getting richer, right? And the students who can afford to go to community college, they deserve the best support, the best advising, the best instructors as well. And spaces that are openly accessible, especially as tuition costs continue to rise and students are taking on incredible amounts of debt. It's essential. And part of my biggest concern when I was at that nonprofit was to help the students who were going to 4-year schools mitigate their debt or at least have a plan to pay it back. Because I'm sure like me, folks who have six figures of college,
Mhm.
graduate school debt. And to me, it's just that's so wrong, but
Yeah.
that's the reality of the education system right now. So,
Mhm.
it frustrates me, but community college, I think, is a solution, at least for those 2 years of the associate's degree.
Yeah, and I never understood because I started at a community college. I graduated from Quincy College in
Hmm.
Massachusetts, and
Yeah.
there's this like I don't know. I mean, it's great that you were in that nonprofit going in there. I'm sure a lot of people didn't know about all the ways that the Pell Grant and the financial aid, people probably didn't even know like it was possible. But I think
Hmm.
there's this like shiny thing put on a 4-year college. People think the 2-year college is like, oh, and I'd be like, I went to a 2-year college and I'm grateful
Hmm.
because I needed that and it was cheaper. The
Absolutely.
class, but people look at it as a negative thing. Why do you think the community college has a negative connotation for some people?
Well, there's a stigma to it, right? Because as I mentioned, it's open to anyone. As long as you graduated high school, you can enroll in community college. And
Yeah.
I think with so much of the 4-year colleges, it's status, right? I mean, it's self-affirmation, right? If you get into an elite institution, it says, "Oh, here's this proof that I'm smart," right? Look at this, look at the
Oh,
name of this
okay. Yeah.
school, right? And so you want to feel that way, and I think
Okay.
you know when I was doing recruiting for the nonprofit, and even when we do outreach for the whole program, there are so many students who had that same stigma for 2-year schools. But I was not ready to go on to a 4-year
Right.
school. And, the idea of taking out a loan when I wasn't even sure if I wanted to go to
Right.
college was just, I couldn't imagine that. Right.
Yeah.
So I think, part of what we need to do is get rid of that stigma against
Yeah.
2-year schools because without that I would never have been able to be successful at the 4-year level or at graduate school. I needed
Right.
that time to
I
build
believe that
myself
too.
up, and
Yeah.
also just financially, Boston's
Yeah.
expensive enough. Don't break the bank paying for education. I mean, at the very least, you can get halfway to a bachelor's degree potentially for free,
Yep.
or for minimal cost.
Mhm.
And so, if you have a full ride to a 4-year school and want to go right into that space, some students want to live in the dorms or have certain parts of the college experience that you might not be able to have at a community college because obviously we don't have dorms. We are a full commuter campus, but financially, it is oftentimes the best option for students.
Mhm.
And that's one of the reasons the nonprofit that I worked at initially only worked with 4-year schools. And as a counselor working with these students, there were so many of them that I knew a 2-year college was the best solution for them
Right.
because I saw their award letters from these 4-year schools that would have had them paying five, ten,
Crazy.
$15,000 a semester when I see
That's
the family's taxes, I know they don't got it like that, right? So I can't I can't reasonably encourage you to take on this kind of debt when I see this other path that you could take that would be debt
yeah,
free, right? The challenge was part of the importance of the program was the promise that we would support you at the school that you went to. And at the time, we weren't working with community colleges, right? So we had some internal conversation, and myself and a few other counselors really pushed for the program to support community college students. And so they
that's
kind
so
of created
good.
a pilot to support students at 2 year school. So we started with Bunker Hill and Roxbury, and that's how I first learned about Bunker Hill Community College firsthand, right? I was supporting the students in the nonprofit at Bunker Hill Community College. And, I just fell in love with the place because,
Yeah,
students from all over the world were coming in there and just being able to connect with each other. It was a vibrant space. And this is obviously before the pandemic began. We're trying to rebuild that culture for the school now. But it let me kind of really understand how the school functions and meet people within the school and see how committed they were. Some of the same things I was committed to in terms of being open access, in terms of supporting students in a way that was financially sustainable and lifting them up in a way that would help them carry forward with whatever their goals were, whether it was their career or more academic goals or things like that.
that's dope.
And so eventually, I said, hey, let me work for the school directly. And so I became an advisor at Bunker Hill. That was, I want to say, 5 years ago.
Hmm.
And so, I was working with students who were walking in, helping them pick their courses, helping them think about their career goals, helping them think about what school they want to transfer to next. And then about 2 years ago, the state of Massachusetts created what's called the Success Fund. And the acronym, I want to say, Supporting Urgent Community College Equity Through uh, something student services. It's a long acronym, right? But
Hmm.
basically, they've given a pool of money to every community college and said, we're giving you this money to support a population within your community that you think needs additional support. And
Hmm.
so some community colleges have created LGBTQIA plus programs.
Hmm.
Some have done, uh, just general minority groups. At Bunker Hill, we looked at the data and we saw that our Black and Latino men were not graduating at the same rate as the rest of our students.
Hmm.
And that was not on them, that was on us as an institution, right? So we decided to create HOPE, which stands for Halting Oppressive Pathways Through Education. And we have it oriented towards our college Black and Latino men. And so for the past couple of years, we've been generating and building this program. And we've met with a lot of success, not only in terms of helping our students become more successful in the classroom, but making sure that they feel a home on this campus,
Yeah,
right? So
yeah.
just a physical space where they can hang out, be themselves. We do sessions where they just are able to talk. We have free dinners where we'll visit a Black or Latino owned restaurant and just sit down and break bread. It's actually called Breaking Bread. And so, it's been incredible not only to be part of building this program from the ground up, but to see how many students have gravitated to our space, especially as we became, we returned to more in-person services as the pandemic has subsided a little bit. And now they are just in our space all the time, eating food, chopping it up, laughing with us, and then recruiting their friends to join us, right? But it was it was overdue.
Yeah.
And the goal is not to just be this silo thing that's within Bunker Hill Community College, but to change the culture of the institution itself to
Mm.
ensure that all these students that we're influencing, and we want to move eventually beyond just Black and Latino men, but we wanted to begin there and expand from there, but to make sure that the college is living up to its, stated mission of equity and making
Yeah.
sure that all the instructors and the staff are of one mind in terms of making sure that every student is able to succeed and be heard and seen.
That's awesome. What do you like when you think about Black and Latino men, and how I think about the stigma that society places on them, and then also like what that must feel for them. But then to decide to go to college, you described you having whiplash being at this prestigious school, but there
Mhm.
was no like real community for you. And so why do you think that the Hope program is so important for Black and brown, Black and Latino men, as far as what you're trying to, sounds like you're building like community. So, because the more I stayed in school, the more less seeing people that look like me. But I'm like, I don't know how I stayed, but I think because my goal was like, I was focused on my goal, not on my environment. But I know a lot of people have a hard time with that. But I
Hmm.
stayed focused on my goal. But environment really matters when it comes to what we're doing. So, what is it
Hmm.
about the whole program that allows them to feel included, you think?
I mean, I think part of it is just seeing other Black and Latino men who are doing work
Yeah.
in education. I mean, when I was in Memphis, for all the flaws to the school that I was at and the lack of resources there, I'll never forget Mr. Bates. He was the first Black male teacher that I had, and he was somebody who took the time to talk to me and encourage me and just kind
So,
of push me to develop myself. And even in the
yeah.
moment, if I didn't retain and go follow through
It
with
was
some of
a
that stuff,
seed.
it was a seed that was planted
Yeah.
that eventually grew, right? And so I
Yeah.
think it's just important to be around other people who look like you, who are doing positive work in the space like education, and for also to remind them how awesome they are because
Yeah.
they're coming into this space with skills and knowledge and things that aren't necessarily appreciated, but that are important to acknowledge, right? I mean,
Yeah.
we have students who are running their own business. We have students who are raising their families, supporting their families
Yeah.
in various ways, and oftentimes we look past those things because it's all about you got to get the right grades, you got to do X, Y, and Z, but we want to try to remove those other barriers, whether it's
Wow.
work for your financial aid or helping you communicate with your professors, because a lot of times they don't even know, they might not know what a 2-year school is or a 4-year school is.
Right.
There's like a hidden curriculum that some
Yep.
students, like, again, I had professors in my family, so I
Yeah.
kind of knew what college
Yeah.
was, and I was exposed to what a college classroom looks like from a very early age. Students who are the first in their family to go to college, they're figuring it out as they go along, right?
Yep.
And it can be very lonely, right? As you're
Yep.
as you're trying to figure out, like, oh, office hours, I can just talk to my professor off rip and just ask
Right.
questions myself, like,
Right.
things like that. And I
Okay.
think the other thing is we just realized so many of our students are dealing with hunger, with homelessness, and we're blessed that we have now a food pantry called the Dish, that has been able
Oh,
to support our students with getting meals. We're helping students to get transportation through the MBTA. So just trying to
whew,
remove these barriers and hurdles that stand in the way of them being their full selves in the classroom,
that's
because
dope.
it's not easy out here for so many of them, and I want them to just be able to be here, be students, and grow in the way that so many of us were able to do so when we started the community college.
That makes a lot of, I get it, right? Like, I think, there was a lot of these things I experienced trying to get through school, but, you came from a line of professors I didn't, and,
Mhm.
just trying to make it happen, and I say it's not easy because sometimes people will look at successful Black people as, "Well, look at they did it," but it's not, like, that simple, and all of these little barriers to have a space to be able to go to for support has to be truly amazing for, the community that you've been able to build over the last 2 years. Um,
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think, it's never done independently, right? No one does it
right,
by
right, right,
themselves, right? And
right.
I think sometimes as men, we want to just be independent and we're going to do it ourselves and don't need any help. And so I think just trying to destigmatize asking for help and
That's
encouraging students to do
that's
things in
good.
community with each other because, you can try to learn by yourself, but typically it doesn't work. You know what I'm saying? And,
Yeah,
and so, or if it does work, you're making things harder for yourself than it needs to be,
yeah,
right? So, not just learning from us, but learning from your peers and recognizing what you have to teach those around you, right?
yeah,
So, all of
that's
that, I think, goes a long way.
now my last kind of question is when it comes to education, because you are clearly passionate about education, for people that are listening who may have been discouraged, because I feel like there's not a lot of Black people in certain spaces that require degrees, and I say, like, I fell into this field by an accident because I was really just like thugging it out. And it worked out for me because I needed my license to practice on my own.
Mhm.
What would you say to encourage people that may have been deterred? Because I know when I was gonna apply to a P, I remember this white lady was like, "Oh, you're not gonna get into this program," and like it depends on who you talk to, can be discouraging. This
Mhm.
one client, he said that his guidance counselor in high school said, "Oh, well, your dad was this. Why don't you just be that?" Like, but he was really smart and creative. there's a lot of adults who have been deterred from college or from higher education because of something that was told to them. Like, what would you say to them to encourage them to? Because and for people that think community college, we just talked about that, but that's a great start if you want to
Hmm.
see if it's for you, where you're not dishing out so much money. But what would you say to them? Because I don't think it's enough of us in certain spaces because it requires degrees.
Yeah. I mean, I think the first thing I would say is it's never too late to start. I have
Mhm.
met people who were 70, 80 years old
Yep.
finishing
Yep.
their associate's degree. I met people who have PhDs in other countries, came here and had to start from and rebuild themselves, learn a new language, and get their degree. You know,
Yep.
students who were taking classes while they were incarcerated or were released and came back to school. So I've seen
That's
students of all kinds of different backgrounds do it. I would just say you don't need to do it by yourself, right?
yes.
You find an institution where they are intentional about providing support and hearing you and listening to you and making sure the institution is designed to support you, because I think the thing that we need to remember is that these institutions were not initially built for us, right? And so
You're
as
right.
we have more of us in these spaces who are willing to speak up and say, we're not doing right by these students who represent so much of our population, these institutions are changing and trying to rebuild themselves to be more
Yeah.
equitable, to be more accessible. And community colleges in general, their mission is to be open access, right? And so
Yeah.
we want to make sure that we are creating space and not saying, oh, like you need to change to be like this. We need to make sure that we're changing to be accessible and open to you all. So yeah,
Nice.
I've seen it done from students of all backgrounds and with all types of things. And you know, maybe you start off with one or two classes a
Yep.
semester and build from there. But you know, I think it's just about being in a space where you inspire and are inspired by others, and that momentum, you know, continues on. Um,
Oh, that's
but yeah,
dope.
that's what I would
That's
say.
good. You gave me chills.
Oh,
If people are listening, wanting to support the Hope Initiative, I see you guys have something coming up in February. How could they support the Hope? Because you guys are doing amazing things. Like I'm excited
hmm,
to really hear from you about like what's happening because there are just so many barriers
hmm,
to getting to the next level. And it sounds like Bunker Hill was able to identify that and utilize the funds in a really
hmm,
creative way, which is
yes.
so amazing. So, how could people support the Hope Initiative?
Yeah, I think the first thing I would say, you know, definitely follow us on social media. Our Instagram is just BHCC Hope, and I think the thing that you're mentioning that I definitely want to plug. So, at the nonprofit that I was at, I had a student who was a wonderful young man, incredibly connected to his community, very inspiring, and he was one of the first students who I encouraged to enroll at Bunker Hill. I worked with him as a student at Bunker Hill, and he was somebody who was radiant on campus and just, you know, he had people following around campus because he had that kind of charisma. And unfortunately, you know, a few years ago, he lost his life in a shooting. And, you know, in his honor, we've created a scholarship called the Boulevard Soto Scholarship. And we're going to be
Oh,
having a fundraising event, but first and foremost, a free dinner that we're going to be holding on February 2nd. It's going to be at La Fabrica Central at 5:30 to 8 o'clock. And so I'm also happy to send you a link to donate to the
yeah.
scholarship because
Yes, do. And
we
I'll be
award,
there.
yeah, please spread the word. Come, and if you want to, you know, tell a friend. We want to spread the word. Honor this young man who was gone too soon, but also honor the recipient of the scholarship who was awarded because we think that they uphold all the incredible things about this young man, Bolivar
Oh, wow.
Soto, who
That's
we lost far
amazing.
too soon. So I think that's the best way to help us out and also just spread the word. If you want to reach out to me, my email is perry.r.hull@gmail.com. I'm happy to let you know more about the program and what we do, answer any questions, anything like that. But yeah, February 2nd, save that date, the Fabrica Central. It should be a good time, and hopefully we can honor Bolivar and his family as well as our new scholarship recipient.
That's awesome. And then Perry's gonna, and I'll have the links for the just donating in general in the show notes. Perry, thank you so much. This was amazing. You are amazing. I really enjoyed
Thank you.
hearing about your story and what you do. Is there any last words you want to tell my audience before you go? Uh-oh, did you freeze? Perry? You froze. Yeah, I think you froze. Um well, at least we got at least we got most of the story from him. I don't think there's any last words. Thank you all so much for tuning in, and this was so amazing learning about this, and we will